Hey everyone, welcome to our community of parents who are dedicated to raising happy, responsible, and resilient teenagers. And by the way, we do all this without yelling or suffering from anxiety or punishing. We're learning how to raise healthy, happy, responsible young teenagers without doing any of that stuff. So welcome. So today's theme is about basically why parents negotiate with their teens when they have something to say or something to do for their teen, and their teen basically changes their mind, and then the parents negotiate, and then all of a sudden things fall apart. Your intended result that you were going for doesn't happen. So let me give you some possibilities as to why that happens. First of all, I like to use the term for the teen who's trying to get you to change your mind or negotiate. I like to call them the house lawyer. And I call them the house lawyer because we've trained our children how to do a really good job getting them to change our minds. Like they're good negotiators. And they make their case in front of the so-called jury in your home, and they're so good at it that we change our minds. We negotiate. So I want to give you some tips as to how not to negotiate, and I want to begin by saying how important it is not to negotiate with your teens. So number one, parents tend to negotiate because they have not clearly defined the exact virtues and values and behaviors they know their son needs in order to make it in the outside world. So let me tell you what I mean by that. And now work with parents, it's very simple, it's very easy. I'll say to a parent, what virtues do you know your son needs to learn? A virtue is a one-word quality. That's it, one-word quality. Responsibility is the most important one I get all the time. I'd say that's closely followed by resiliency, accountability, discipline, focus, remorse, empathy, cooperation. These are the most common virtues that I hear that they know their son needs to learn, not only to contribute to the well-being of the home, but also to make it in that outside world out there. So that's number one. Parents don't narrow down what they know their sons need to learn specifically, and that means that they don't have the virtues, one word, so their son can get it in one word. When I say the word value, I'm talking about the one-word sentence that you would make up to clearly define the virtue you want him to learn, so you get out of these 5-minute lectures that they just tune you out after about 5 sentences. So a one-sentence value for a virtue like responsibility would be doing things you like to do and you don't like to do until completion. That's the value. That's the definition. You can say it in one sentence, because if you want your son to stay attending to your words, it's got to be short. Also, if we want to develop their prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain that allows them to think for themselves, your messaging has to be short, right to the point. So then you have a virtue and you have a value, and then you have a behavior that you know your son needs to learn, like making his bed, right, or washing the dishes. So you would weave that virtue and that value into the conversation. Something simple like, son, I'm asking you to become more responsible. That simply means doing things you like to do and don't like to do until completion. So I'm asking you to clear the dishes from the table and wash them every night. So that's how we'll know that you're practicing being more responsible here in the house, so that'll be way easier to do it when you're out of the house. Thank you. That's it. Something simple. And you have to have a whole list of the ones you know your son needs to learn. The next thing is you need to have a way to communicate just in general with your teenager, because if you don't, again, you'll go off into all these diatribes about 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 8 minutes, and they can't follow you and they won't respect you when you speak and so long-winded to them. To your teenager, when you spend all that time talking to them, it means to them that they don't think you're smart enough, that they're smart enough to do what they need to do. Or they just feel insecure that they're not going to make it in the world because we're spending all this time lecturing them. Regardless, they're not going to do it because they don't trust that you can lead them to become more independent. I'm going to say that again. They often won't do what we're asking because they don't think that you're the one that's capable of teaching them on how to adapt to the outside world. And part is because you don't know how to communicate them in a very specific way. So when I work with parents, we have a 7-step process. It's really simple. It's really easy. You don't have to argue. You don't have to yell. You don't have to get anxious because it's very clear. And then the most important thing is that you have to have a system for implementing consequences, not punishments. When a young person hears the word consequence, they think punishment. Why? Because typically most parents, and believe me, I made all these mistakes when I was parenting my teen son Gabe and my daughter Becca, but parents will tend to just make up punishments right on the spot. Even if you think you have a good consequence, and we use positive discipline consequences in my system so that the young men or the young women can learn a lesson from it, which will then make it easier for them to make it in that outside world. So when you have a virtue and a value and it's very concise like that, it makes it very easy then to have a system for them to implement when they don't do it. The positive discipline consequences we call the choice consequence pathway. In other words, you have choices for them on what they're going to do to clean it up so that you can all move on. The consequence is a natural act of activity to get back into alignment with the virtues and values and behaviors of the home. So you have a system that's ready to go. You don't have to make things up on the spot. In fact, we always teach our parents, don't give any consequence at the time of there's an infraction or something. Do it the next day if you have to, but you have to be calm and really ready to go. Plus, in our system, we actually give the teenager a say on what the consequence can be, so they're fully engaged in the process, because the context is everything you learn to do now as a consequence for the things that you didn't do or should have done will make it way easier when you do it out there. So you have to have virtues and values and behaviors clearly defined, number one. Number two, you have to have a good communication system in general when speaking to your teens. Number three, you have to have what we call a choice consequence pathway. You have to have a positive discipline system in place so they know you're always coming from clarity. In summary, I want to say this before I tell you a good story. There's certain virtues that you want to become masterful at when you're speaking to your teen children so that they respect you. Number one, you have to speak in a calm voice. And when I work with parents, I teach them how to relax literally in 15 seconds, like on the spot. They're unshakable. So that when you communicate to your teenager, you're very calm. That's number one. Number two, you got to be compassionate. You got to open your heart when you're speaking. They're your children. Even though they act like as if they can have you move out of the house and they can take over and pay all the bills, they're still children also. They're learning how to find their way. So don't be angry, right? Be calm. And number two, be compassionate that they're learning how to make it in the outside world and they're counting on us to teach them. Number three, you must be exactly clear on the virtue, value, and behavior. You have to have clarity. Number four, you have to be certain. You got to make sure that you're conveying to your teen that you are exactly clear what you're talking about. And when you have those elements, they're way more likely to trust you. So here's a good story before we end this little Facebook Live. I started an event, a nonprofit event called the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, to help parents have their sons learn how to go through a rite of passage and come home way more responsible and resilient. And so there was a young man who attended this event called the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend, and at the same time their son was at this event going through his rite of passage, the parents were at an event with me in a hotel nearby, and it's actually a rite of passage for the parents so that they become way more adept at parenting a teenager. So at this event, the parents came to my workshop, the young man was in the Ultimate Weekend, and then they came for me for some private coaching because they were having a hard time disciplining their son, who's a great kid, and also just wanted to do whatever he wanted to. So long story short, these parents implemented the system that I'm sort of outlining for you. It took them a few months to really master it. And then they reported to me, I remember the phone call we had on this Zoom coaching call, that their son stopped negotiating. He stopped arguing. He stopped making up all these reasons why he should or shouldn't do something because the system worked. The young man got that no matter what he tried to get out of or get into, there was going to be a consequence, and it was not a punitive act. It was something to teach him on how to make it in the outside world, and they didn't negotiate it. Because if the young man didn't do it, then the parents got the opportunity to make up the consequence, which the young man never wanted. Okay? So this young man, within 3 to 6 months, he just got tired of doing consequences. And so the purpose of that sort of celebration call that the parents gave me was that their son was done. For months now, he had been doing all the things he needed to do with the understanding that it was not just to help share resources in the house and helping out there, but it was going to help him make it in the outside world. And so to this day, not only does that young man not negotiate the consequences, he is so much more ready for the challenges of the young adult world, and that family spends most of their time now just celebrating their lives together because there's no more conflict. So thank you for making the time to be with me on Facebook Live, and I want to let you know that there'll be many more sessions coming up, and we really encourage you to join our community of like-minded parents who really are dedicated to raising their teens to be happier personally and more responsible, with their family and community, and way more resilient so they can handle the challenges of the young adult world. Thank you so much for watching.